As we know, Donald Trump this week made an historic political comeback, becoming the 47th President of the United States. My colleague Ross Greenwood spoke to New York Post's Miranda Devine in New York City this week.
Miranda Devine, Times Square, so many people around the place. Did Americans get the election result right on Tuesday night?
They sure did, and it wasn't any doubt about what they meant when they gave that resounding victory to Donald Trump. It looks like he's got not only a clean sweep of all those battleground states, but also the House, the Senate, as well as the popular vote. Now, nobody would have thought that possible. It's really the greatest comeback of all time, to use his own language.
Righto, yeah, but I want to go to that because he's won it so comprehensively. The polls were tight. The papers said this is going to be really, it's a toss of a coin. It wasn't in the end.
It wasn't, no, and I think there'll be a lot of soul searching for the pollsters, most of whom have got it wrong now 3 times in a row. And there are a couple of outlying pollsters like Rasmussen, like Robert Cahaly from Trafalgar. They got it much more right. And Cahaly says that the other pollsters just kind of herded together because they didn't want to be different. And he said last time there were shy Trump voters, this time they were scared Trump voters, because under Joe Biden, I guess the law and order had become so punitive against Trump supporters, stemming from January 6, when you had grandmothers who just wandered in open doors going to jail. You had the lawfare committed against Donald Trump himself. I think that the American public saw through that for what it was. In a country where crime is not being punished, in New York, where Trump got a 30% uplift, won 30% of the vote, unheard of, more than any Republican has for 20 years. Law and order is a real problem. Crime is a real problem, and you see where people who thieve and murder and bash, shoplift and so on are not getting punished, whereas Trump supporters are being raided by the FBI at 6 o'clock in the morning for being anti-abortion, raided for praying silently outside abortion clinics, or just for being Donald Trump or his lawyers. They've all been bankrupted, jailed, attacked. So I think the country's had enough of that.
Okay, so going back to 2020, it looked like Donald Trump as a political force was completely spent at that time.
Yeah.
So the comeback is astonishing, but it also says something about the Democrats and Joe Biden, that he was able to come back from that.
100%. If Joe Biden had been the president that he promised to be during the 2020 election, a kind, uniting, unifying man, I think that they wouldn't have done so badly, but he was the opposite. He was even more divisive, I think, than Barack Obama. And, day one he came in, he undid all of Donald Trump's executive orders on the border, laid open that invasion of 15 to 20 million illegal migrants.
And you feel that here in this town, right? In this city, in New York, you feel the migration issue. When the hotels, the Roosevelt Hotel's being turned into a migration centre,
yeah.
The people here feel it in terms of the crime, they feel it in terms of the housing costs. All of these issues have an effect on the way in which people feel, not just here, but right around the country.
That's right. I mean, every single state's become a border state because the Biden administration flew these illegal migrants from the border and secreted them all over the country. They were doing it in New York in the dead of night and putting them on charter buses and putting them in every corner of the tri-state area, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. And so New Yorkers are sick of it because their taxes they see, it's a struggling town. There's a lot of people trying to make a quid, not doing very well with inflation the way it is. And then they see illegal migrants break the law when they come here. They might be perfectly nice people, but they're freeloading and they're being handed free room and board, free education, free legal, free medical, and $5,000 in sort of debit cards. So that really goes against the grain of there's an egalitarian feeling here in New York, even though it's a sort of a city of rich and poor. Most of the masses of New Yorkers just get along, and they see something as unjust as that. It makes them angry, even if they normally vote Democrat. I think that drove a lot of them, especially Hispanics, into the arms of Donald Trump.
Okay, so then there's something else here, because your book, The Big Guy, documents Joe Biden and the family, and also just you talk about the corruption in the background that people also were conscious of as they went to the polling booths.
That's right. And, you know, in 2020, the New York Post, I did a story called about Hunter Biden's laptop, and then wrote a book called Laptop from Hell. And that documented a lot of the corruption that went on with Joe Biden and his family when he was vice president, taking in millions of dollars from China and Ukraine and Kazakhstan. But the biggest story turned out to be the story of the cover-up. And that was the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, the Department of Justice, all kind of colluding to censor our story before the 2020 election, and then to cover up the Biden corruption. And these are the same people who were sabotaging Donald Trump in his first presidency, the same people propping up Kamala Harris, and the people that Donald Trump calls the enemy within.
So then you've written the book, but what I want to know is the mistakes of the Democrats over the past 4 years. Do you see parallels with the Labor Party and mistakes it's making in the way it's judging the population in Australia?
Definitely. I think if for some reason Labor in Australia seems to take a lot of its talking points from the Democrats here, and they really should take a good look at the disaster the Democrats are here. It has not been a success. They're good at creating the narrative because they control the media. But in the end, it was a failure for them because they failed to see what was in front of them. And they are elitist, they are authoritarian. They projected their own sort of dictatorial stance on Donald Trump, who's actually quite a laissez-faire guy.
Okay, so just unpack that a little bit, because one aspect of this election is that working class people who normally would be rusted on Democrat supporters, or in Australia, Labor supporters, gravitated to the other side because they could actually see him talking a language about their jobs, about their businesses, that their own party, the Democrats, were not talking about.
Exactly. And I think the Democrats thought that they could use identity politics and the politics of division and just judging that everybody hated Donald Trump. And in fact, people had more important ambitions, such as their own checkbooks, their own jobs, inflation, illegal migration. And also there was an undercurrent of this sort of cultural revolution that the Democrats have ushered in, which particularly Hispanics and also the Muslims in Michigan were not into. And that was, in one sentence, they call it transing the children. And that means this sort of transgender ideology that was pumped into schools along with a lot of soft porn. People from traditional backgrounds, Christians and so on, did not like that. And that became emblematic of what the Biden administration was all about.
But a part of this is also in Australia and here, just misjudging the common sense of the working people, the voting people, the rump of those people. And that is, if you like, the disaster that any political party will go down.
Yeah, it's worse than misjudging. It's actually condescending. It's looking down on them from a superior vantage point. And this is why there's such a push in Australia, in the UK, in Europe, in America, but it's being resisted here to impose censorship, particularly on social media. There's some idea from the left that if they can control what people see and read and watch, then they can control them ideologically. But unfortunately, with the way the internet is, regular people are getting their information from everywhere, and so the media gatekeepers have lost power. And you see that particularly now with this election, where they all called it wrong and they're all melting down on air.
Well, I'll tell you what, Miranda Devine, in Times Square, great to be chatting to you. It's a wonderful freak show, this thing, isn't it? So it's so good to be here with you. And so, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Ross.